Ethan had always thought life with Clara was perfect in its quiet way. 6 years of marriage, small routines that felt like home, and a love that had grown steadily, gently, like a plant nurtured over time. Their mornings were slow, coffee in hand, newspaper or soft music in the background, a sense of comfort that never felt exciting, but was safe, reliable, warm. But lately, Clara had changed. She smiled differently, lingered on her phone, and sometimes seemed lost in thoughts that Ethan couldn't reach. At first, he brushed it off, thinking it was stress from work or a need for personal space. But the tension in her voice, the way she avoided his eyes at dinner, told a different story. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the window and the world outside felt hushed, Clara turned to him with a nervous, almost shy expression and spoke words that stopped Ethan's heart. "I've been thinking, maybe we could try something different. An open marriage," she said, and her voice wavered with a mix of fear and hope. Ethan blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. Open marriage. The idea felt like stepping onto a bridge without guardrails, walking into a storm he didn't know he was ready for. He loved Clara with every part of himself, and the thought of sharing her affection, or even imagining her being with someone else, made his stomach twist. Yet, he saw something in her eyes, something earnest and vulnerable that he had never seen before, and it made him pause. She wasn't being selfish or cruel. She was expressing a longing, a curiosity about life and love that he didn't fully understand but couldn't dismiss. Ethan felt torn between his instincts, which screamed caution, and the deep desire not to push Clara away to protect their bond. He asked her questions, careful, measured, trying to understand why she wanted this, what she hoped to find, what it would mean for them. Clara's answers were sincere but hesitant, describing feelings she couldn't quite name, a desire to explore parts of herself while still loving him, still coming back to him. Ethan listened, heart pounding, mind spinning with jealousy, fear, and a strange, reluctant curiosity. He tried to picture their life this way, a life that would allow freedom but demand trust beyond anything he had ever given, and he realized how unprepared he was for such a shift. Days passed, and the idea settled like a shadow over their home. Ethan found himself watching Clara more closely, noticing small details he had ignored before, the way she laughed at messages on her phone, the soft blush that crossed her cheeks, the way she seemed to float through the rooms with a lightness that made him ache. He struggled with anger and longing, questions that burned in the corners of his mind. Was love about keeping each other close or letting each other go? Could he really accept this without losing himself? One rainy night, unable to sleep, Ethan sat alone on the couch, staring at the flickering candlelight, thinking about all the years they had spent building their life, the quiet dinners, the shared dreams, the moments of intimacy that had been theirs alone. He remembered their first date, the nervous smiles, the way she had taken his hand as if it belonged in hers, the late-night talks that stretched until dawn, and he felt a pang of fear that all of that could be threatened by something he didn't understand. Yet there was also a small, stubborn part of him that wanted to try, to see if love could survive this new test, if trust could bend without breaking, if their connection could endure the unknown. When Clara finally came to bed, her hand brushing his arm, he felt a swirl of conflicting emotions: love, fear, desire, confusion, but also a strange sense of readiness, as if stepping into this challenge could reveal something deeper about them both. They talked quietly that night, words careful, deliberate, full of hesitation and hope. She promised honesty, transparency, and the assurance that he was still the center of her world. Ethan nodded, heart heavy but willing, agreeing to play along, to explore this new chapter not because he fully understood it, but because he loved her enough to try. As sleep eluded him, he thought about the days ahead, the tests of patience and loyalty, the moments of jealousy and longing that would surely come. He imagined Clara's laughter with someone else, and a strange ache settled in his chest, one he couldn't shake. Yet, he also imagined moments of intimacy renewed, conversations deepened, and the possibility that this experiment, dangerous as it seemed, could lead them to a place of unexpected understanding. The night stretched long and quiet, rain tapping against the windows like soft reminders that life was unpredictable, that love was never simple, and that sometimes the hardest choices were the ones made out of care and devotion. Ethan knew this was only the beginning, a step onto unfamiliar ground, and his heart felt both heavy and light, tangled in hope and fear. As dawn approached, he made a silent promise to himself. He would stay honest, he would stay patient, and he would do his best to navigate the delicate balance of love and freedom. Yet, deep inside, he couldn't ignore the flicker of anxiety, the whisper that not everything would go as planned. And with that thought lingering, Ethan closed his eyes, holding Clara close, aware that the coming days would test the limits of their bond, the strength of their hearts, and the very meaning of trust in ways he had never imagined. After agreeing to Clara's idea of an open marriage, Ethan tried to convince himself that he could handle it, that love meant giving space as much as holding on, but the reality was far more complicated than he had imagined. At first, they established rules, careful boundaries to protect their marriage, and Ethan threw himself into the process with a mix of hesitation and hope. He encouraged Clara to explore her connections, watched her glow with excitement after dates, and listened to her recount moments with a smile that made him ache in ways he couldn't explain. He even tried dipping his own toes into conversations and casual outings with other people, but every small interaction reminded him of what he truly valued: Clara's attention, her laughter, the way her hand felt in his. At work, he found his mind wandering, imagining her with someone else, the pangs of jealousy hitting him in sudden, sharp waves, and he realized that his heart was not as easy to train for freedom as he had hoped. They tried weekend outings, group events, and casual meetings with new people, yet every time he saw Clara return home, radiant and animated, he felt a mixture of relief and longing, and the old comfort of their shared life now carried an undercurrent of tension he couldn't shake. Nights became a strange mix of closeness and distance. He held her, whispered that he loved her, kissed her softly. Yet beneath the surface, his mind raced with questions, doubts, and subtle pain. He noticed how she laughed at texts in her phone, how her cheeks would flush at small gestures, and how easily she slipped into conversations with others, all the while maintaining a tender affection for him that was both reassuring and heartbreaking. Ethan felt as if he were walking a tightrope, balancing love and trust with fear and insecurity. And yet, despite the inner turmoil, he refused to show his full struggle, fearing that his doubts might make Clara feel guilty or trapped. One evening, after a particularly long day, he sat alone in the living room, rain streaking the windows, thinking about how much had changed in just a few weeks. Clara had gone on another outing, and the house felt empty in a way that was unfamiliar, cold, and quiet. He tried to distract himself with old hobbies, reading, music, anything to fill the growing space inside him. But the longing for her presence, for the intimacy they once shared without complication, gnawed at him relentlessly. The hardest part, he realized, wasn't her freedom. It was how deeply he still loved her, how attached he was to their shared history, and how unprepared he was for the emotional turbulence this experiment had unleashed. Yet, there were moments that reminded him why he had agreed in the first place: the gentle touch of her hand at dinner, the shared laughter over old memories, the way she rested her head against his shoulder as if no one else existed in the world. Those fleeting moments of connection became lifelines, but they were often followed by a wave of doubt, a whisper that perhaps he was being naive, that love might not survive when stretched beyond familiar boundaries. Ethan's heart ached with contradictions, wanting to support Clara, fearing betrayal, longing for her affection, and wrestling with jealousy that he tried to suppress. He found himself reflecting on the early days of their relationship, the way she had captured him with her energy, the quiet moments of trust and intimacy that had felt sacred and now felt fragile, almost threatened. One weekend, they attended a small gathering with friends, and Ethan watched Clara interact with someone new, a man with a charming smile and easy conversation. She laughed freely, leaning slightly closer than usual, and Ethan felt a sharp twinge of insecurity. He wanted to pull her close, to remind her that their bond was unshakable, but he held himself back, reminding himself that this was part of their agreement. Still, the ache in his chest was undeniable, and he realized that trust, while necessary, was far more painful when tested against the realities of desire and attraction. Nights became a roller coaster of emotion. He would fall asleep beside her, heart heavy, mind restless, wondering if she truly still loved him, as she said, if he could survive the swelling jealousy that rose unbidden, if the marriage they had carefully built could withstand this experiment. Conversations grew longer, more honest, and sometimes tearful, as Ethan tried to articulate feelings he had never faced so directly: fear of loss, longing for closeness, confusion over freedom and loyalty. Clara listened patiently, apologizing when her actions hurt him, reassuring him when he felt insecure, and sometimes sharing her own fears, her doubts about the changes, the guilt she felt for unintentionally causing him pain. Slowly, Ethan began to understand that love was not only about presence, but also about vulnerability, about opening oneself to uncertainty while maintaining a sense of self. Yet, even with this realization, he couldn't shake the growing tension inside him, the gnawing question of whether his heart could endure watching someone he loved experience affection with others. One rainy night after Clara had gone out, he sat on the couch staring at the dim light of the living room, feeling a mix of sadness, longing, and reluctant acceptance. He thought about the times she had comforted him during tough days, the way she remembered little details, the way her smile could lift him instantly, and he realized that these memories, these threads of intimacy, were stronger than any fleeting moment of jealousy. Still, the idea of her embracing another person, of sharing laughter, closeness, and attention with someone else, left a hollow ache in his chest that he couldn't deny. He tried to focus on their future, imagining moments where honesty and communication would guide them through difficult days, but the emotional strain was undeniable. Ethan began to notice changes in himself too. He became more reflective, more sensitive, more aware of his emotions and their depth. He learned patience, endurance, and the delicate art of balancing love with personal discomfort. Yet he also understood that no amount of reflection could prepare him for the day when his trust would be tested in ways he hadn't imagined, when the boundaries they had agreed upon would collide with the unpredictable nature of human desire. And as he lay awake, listening to the rain, he realized that while he had agreed to play along, his heart was quietly recording every moment, every smile, every whispered word, every flutter of emotion, storing them for a time he feared but also hoped would come, the moment when clarity would reveal itself, when honesty would be demanded, and when love would either be strengthened or fractured. The nights of longing, the days of watching, the hours of inner struggle were shaping him, reshaping his understanding of commitment, trust, and devotion. Each interaction Clara had, each story she shared with laughter or excitement, became a mirror for his own emotions, reflecting a mixture of pride, fear, jealousy, and enduring love. Ethan realized that this experiment wasn't just about freedom. It was a test of hearts, a lesson in patience, empathy, and courage, forcing him to confront feelings he had long avoided, forcing him to understand the complexity of love and the fragility of trust. As another evening drew to a close, he sat in silence, the house empty, the rain soft against the windows, and allowed himself to feel every emotion, every pang of longing, every flicker of hope and fear. He knew that the journey ahead would be unpredictable, filled with emotional turbulence, tender moments, and painful realizations, and that the choices they made now would shape not only their marriage, but the very essence of who they were as individuals and as partners. And with that thought lingering, Ethan prepared himself for the days to come, uncertain, vulnerable, yet unwilling to turn away from the love that had defined his life, ready to face the emotional storm with patience, honesty, and a fragile hope that love, tested as it was, could endure. Ethan thought he could handle the arrangement, thought he could manage his jealousy and trust Clara fully, but one ordinary Tuesday changed everything. It started with a small ping on his phone, a notification from an app he rarely checked, one that Clara had left open when she stepped out for groceries. At first, Ethan hesitated, telling himself not to peek, to respect her privacy, but curiosity gnawed at him relentlessly. He picked up the phone, thumb hovering, heart thudding, until he finally tapped, scrolling through messages that made his chest tighten. At first it seemed harmless, friendly exchanges, jokes, casual greetings, but then the tone shifted, subtly at first, until he saw words that made his stomach twist, phrases that hinted at intimacy, laughter shared in ways he had never shared with Clara, private jokes that seemed to belong to someone else. His mind raced. He tried to breathe, tried to rationalize, tried to remind himself that this was part of their agreement, that they had consented to this, but nothing could prepare him for the sting of seeing his wife, the woman he had loved fiercely for years, engaging emotionally with someone else. Each message felt like a small betrayal, a quiet crack in the foundation of the life they had built together. Ethan's thoughts spiraled. He imagined the moments behind the texts, the conversations, the laughter, the closeness, and a wave of fear and heartbreak washed over him. He wanted to close the phone, to pretend he hadn't seen anything, but his eyes couldn't look away. The more he read, the heavier his heart became, until it felt like a physical weight pressing against his chest. He paced the living room, phone clutched tightly, rain beginning to tap against the windows as if nature itself was mourning with him, and he realized that trust, while given freely, was fragile, and the experiment they had embarked upon was testing more than their patience. It was testing the very essence of their bond. Memories of their early years flashed through his mind. The late-night talks, quiet dinners, laughter over shared secrets, the way Clara had always been his anchor, and he felt a deep, aching longing for the simplicity and certainty that had once defined their love. He questioned himself, wondering if he had been naive to think he could watch her explore freedom without being affected, if love could truly survive curiosity when confronted with the raw reality of human emotion. Ethan's emotions swung violently between anger and sorrow, confusion and yearning, as he tried to imagine confronting Clara, imagining the questions he would ask, the words he would say, the trembling in his voice that he tried to suppress. Yet even as he felt wounded, he couldn't deny the enduring love that had led him to agree to this arrangement in the first place, the love that compelled him to stay, to understand, to navigate this difficult path despite the pain it caused. Hours passed, and the house remained silent, except for the soft patter of rain. Ethan replayed the messages in his mind, every word, every laughter, every suggestion of closeness, and realized that the arrangement had become more than a simple test. It had evolved into a mirror reflecting both Clara's desires and his own vulnerabilities, a harsh lesson in how love could be both freeing and terrifying. He thought about the conversations they had shared about honesty, about trust, about boundaries, and now he wondered if their ideals could survive when confronted with raw, unfiltered emotion. The man in the messages wasn't a stranger in appearance, but in the intimacy he shared with Clara, he was someone who had entered a space that Ethan had always believed belonged solely to him. Panic and sadness mixed, creating a knot in his stomach that wouldn't loosen, and for the first time since agreeing to the open marriage, Ethan considered whether his heart could endure this without shattering completely. He tried to focus on the times Clara had reassured him, times when her hand had found his in quiet solidarity, times when her words had promised love and return, but each reassurance now felt fragile against the weight of what he had just discovered. The hours melted into evening, and Ethan realized he was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually. He wanted to talk to her, wanted to confront her, but he didn't yet know how, feared the words might come out harsh, sharp, and damaging, feared that he might say something he couldn't take back. Yet, as he put down the phone, a quiet resolve began to form. He needed clarity, honesty, a conversation that would not only confront the messages, but also address the growing tension between love and freedom, desire and loyalty. Deep inside, he feared that confrontation might change everything, that the bond he had relied on for years could fracture under the weight of truth. But he also knew that silence would be worse, that pretending the messages didn't exist would erode his sense of self and the foundation of their marriage. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, mind spinning, replaying Clara's laughter, the texts, the imagined moments, and he realized that the experiment had taken a turn he hadn't anticipated. It was no longer about casual freedom or safe exploration. It had become a test of resilience, a challenge to his emotional endurance, a confrontation with jealousy, love, and heartbreak all at once. He thought about confronting Clara the next morning, about choosing his words carefully, about allowing her space to explain without judgment. And yet part of him ached to demand answers immediately, to understand the emotional depth that the messages suggested. Rain continued to fall, the steady rhythm against the windows mirroring the chaos inside him, and he felt a profound loneliness, even though the house was full of their shared memories, their furniture, their life together. He realized that love was never simple, never predictable, and that the rules they had set could never fully guard against the vulnerability of the human heart. Ethan's emotions were raw, tender, a mixture of longing, hurt, curiosity, and determination, and he knew that the coming conversation with Clara would define not just their marriage, but their understanding of trust, honesty, and the boundaries of love. He thought about the early mornings when they had held hands in the kitchen, the quiet nights when she had rested her head on his chest, the comfort of knowing they were each other's safe place, and feared that the messages he had just read could unravel all of it. Yet, a small flicker of hope remained. He loved her, still, fiercely, unconditionally, and he believed that confronting this together could either mend or redefine their connection. Hours passed. The rain slowed to a drizzle, and Ethan finally allowed himself to rest, exhausted by emotion, but resolved to face the truth. He knew that the moment of reckoning was coming, that tomorrow he would need to find words to express the pain, the fear, and the enduring love he still felt, and that their relationship, tested as it was, had a chance to survive only if both were willing to be vulnerable and honest. As he drifted into uneasy sleep, he held onto the memory of her smile, her voice, the life they had shared, and wondered whether love could survive not just temptation, but the harsh mirror of truth reflected in messages he was never meant to see. The night was long, quiet, and introspective, and Ethan understood that from this point onward, nothing would feel the same. Nothing would be untouched by the weight of emotional reality. And yet, deep in his heart, he resolved that he would face Clara, face the messages, and face whatever came next, ready to fight for the fragile, complicated, and beautiful bond that had always defined their life together. The next morning, Ethan waited in the living room, heart heavy, mind racing, every sound from outside making him jump, every second stretching endlessly as he rehearsed the conversation he knew he had to have. When Clara walked through the door, radiant as always but unaware of the storm brewing inside him, he felt a sudden rush of love and hurt collide, leaving him breathless. She smiled, greeted him warmly, and he struggled to meet her eyes, afraid that the words, once spoken, would shatter the fragile balance between them. Finally, he drew a deep breath and said, "We need to talk." And the cheerful air around her shifted instantly, replaced by concern and a quiet apprehension. They sat together, the silence between them heavy, full of unsaid emotions, until Ethan began, carefully, deliberately, recounting what he had seen, the messages, the laughter shared, the intimacy hinted at, every detail he had agonized over, every pang of jealousy he had felt. Clara's face fell as she listened, guilt and sadness washing over her features, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. She explained softly that she hadn't realized how deeply it would hurt him, how the freedom she had wanted to explore had unintended consequences, how she still loved him and hadn't wanted to cause pain. Ethan listened, emotions swinging between anger, sorrow, longing, and relief, trying to absorb not just her words, but her tone, her remorse, the sincerity in her eyes. He admitted his own fears, the jealousy that had gnawed at him, the loneliness that had shadowed his days, the constant ache of imagining her with someone else. And Clara reached for his hand, a silent apology that said more than words ever could. They talked for hours, sometimes pausing to cry, sometimes laughing at the absurdity of human desire and the unexpected complications that life had thrown at them, each revelation drawing them closer despite the wounds of the past weeks. Ethan realized that the messages, painful as they were, had forced them into a space of radical honesty, where every fear, every longing, every vulnerability had to be named and shared. And for the first time in weeks, he felt a strange relief, as if a weight had been lifted from his chest. Clara admitted that the experiment had taught her as much about herself as about their marriage, that she valued their connection above all else, and that she wanted to rebuild trust in ways that went beyond agreements and boundaries. Together, they explored what they wanted their relationship to look like, acknowledging that love was not about control, but about choice, about returning to each other each day with intention and care, about understanding that human hearts are fragile, prone to longing, curiosity, and mistakes, but resilient when nurtured with honesty. Ethan felt a mixture of pride and humility, recognizing that his willingness to confront his pain, to speak his truth without blame, had created a space for Clara to do the same, and he marveled at the complexity of their emotions, at how love could be tested and yet endure when both partners were committed to understanding and empathy. By evening, the storm of emotion had settled into a quiet, tender intimacy. They prepared dinner together, exchanging glances full of unspoken forgiveness, holding hands in the kitchen, laughing at small mishaps, the ordinary moments suddenly infused with a depth they hadn't felt in months. Ethan reflected on how fragile trust is, how easily it can be shaken, but also how resilient it can be when met with honesty and patience. He realized that their marriage was not broken, but transformed, reshaped by the trials they had faced, and that the love that remained was stronger, more conscious, more deliberate than before. They shared a quiet walk after dinner, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement, rain from earlier leaving a fresh, clean scent in the air, and Ethan felt a sense of calm he hadn't known in weeks. He held Clara close, feeling the warmth of her body, the steady beat of her heart, and knew that whatever challenges came next, they had proven they could face them together, with vulnerability, courage, and a renewed commitment to each other. As they returned home, he looked into her eyes, seeing both regret and hope mirrored there, and whispered that he loved her, and she whispered it back, the words heavy with emotion and promise. That night, as they lay in bed, hands intertwined, Ethan realized that love is not simply about avoiding pain or keeping each other from the world, but about weathering storms together, about choosing one another every day, about acknowledging imperfections and still deciding to stay, to trust, to forgive. The messages that had once felt like betrayal were now lessons in patience, empathy, and the depth of human emotion, and while the scars would remain, they were reminders of the journey they had survived. Ethan and Clara drifted to sleep, hearts tender but resilient, understanding that love is never simple, never guaranteed, but always worth fighting for when nurtured with honesty, respect, and unwavering commitment. And as the city settled into night, Ethan felt a quiet hope that this new chapter, built on truth and reconnection, would carry them forward, that their bond, tested and proven, could endure anything life might throw their way, that despite fear, doubt, and longing, they had found each other again, stronger, wiser, and deeply in love.